Welcome to Health Unabashed, the show that is unapologetically passionate about innovation as a catalyst for improving care. Hosted by digital health advocate, influencer, and author Gil Bash, the show looks at the thought-provoking ideas, people, and companies who are making a difference. I'm Greg Masters, the producer and co-host of the show, and join Gil as we engage industry talent who share their insights and best practices on how to connect the dots to create sustainable change. On today's show, our guest is physician scientist Amir Kalali, MD. And with that introduction, Gil, over to you.
Greg, thank you so much for the gracious introduction. As always, it's wonderful to partner with you and, of course, Healthcare Now Radio. We have a fantastic guest with us today, Dr. Amir Kalali. Dr. Kalali is a visionary. He is a community builder. He has done some incredible things. I've been privileged to actually be part of many of those things. He was the founder of a very important meeting that this year gathered about 1,000 people from around the world called CNS Summit. CNS Summit stands for Collaborate for Novel Solutions. It stemmed from his work as head of neurosciences at Quintiles. He started what was then CNS, Central Nervous System Summit, focusing on, obviously, neurosciences. And that morphed through the years because of the atmosphere and the energy into something that really brought people together to explore what were the possibilities of bringing ideas forward in conversation, in collaboration. And it's just a magnificent event. I'm privileged to go every single year. He also is a pioneer in the concept of decentralized clinical trials. Craig Lipsid is a partner in that. Craig obviously is co-founder along with Dr. Kalali, Amir in DTRA.org. Today, I think, and Amir will bring us up to date on that, has, I think, well over 150 members from industry, from government, patient organizations, and so forth, who are coming together to make really clinical research far more accessible and diverse in its design, to bring in the possibility of digital health technologies, and to make sure that actually we can look at drug innovation in a different light. We can bring it forward faster so that people who are really yearning for cures may have that possibility. Amir, welcome to the program. It's a thrill to have you. Ours is a very precious relationship, and I've wanted to speak to you about some of the stuff you're doing for quite some time. But before I leap into that, I just wanted to ask you, I don't know if many people know, you have an incredible background of adventure. You left your home country to go to the United Kingdom to study medicine, first to go to high school and then to study medicine by yourself. In many cases, your family far away. You had to really absorb and integrate into a system. I think you got your MD degrees in the United Kingdom, if I'm not mistaken, and then did a second residency in Australia, and then came to the United States. What countries haven't you been to at this point? Tell us.
So that was mostly accurate, Gil. So so I would say, first of all, thank you for inviting me. It's always a pleasure to be in conversation with you. Any day I can talk to Gil Bash is a good day. Actually, I started in Swiss boarding school when I was 6, then went to English boarding school, and it was before high school, it was prep school, as they would call it, and then public school, which is actually very private, right? And then did my medical training in England, for sure. I am still licensed to practice, in multiple jurisdictions, including, England and California. But yeah, so it was certainly an interesting experience being in boarding school at a young age in England and Switzerland, for sure. That was quite character building, as they say. In terms of travel, yeah, I think before the pandemic, I was probably traveling more than most people. So at least 30 countries a year. Yeah, it was quite a few decades going around the world. And to me, travel obviously opens the mind. So I feel very lucky to have been able to do that all those years, and hopefully we'll continue to do so going forward.
I'm with you. One of the superpowers, you often ask people, tell us about your superpower. And you have a very unique superpower. It seems simple, but having seen you exercise this for the many years, it's anything but. you bring out the best in people. You are able to get people to sit down at the table. And for those of you who have never been to Summit before, CNS Summit, it's lovingly referred to just as Summit. It's a community. You bring together people from the Food and Drug Administration, from industry, from patient organizations, people from finance. You'll see everybody from Fred Hassan to John Scully to Ali Parsa of Babylon Health, a wide swath of people who come together, and they're really interested in each other, and they're really interested in helping each other. Your superpower is opening up the possibilities of collaboration. People in your presence want to work together, whether it's in decentralized clinical trials, whether it's in the life sciences and health innovation. You're also a psychiatrist, so I'm going to ask you for a moment to analyze yourself. How is it that you're able to bring out that special ability of people in our sector to want to work together, a sector that's so known for being competitive?
It's a really interesting question. I would say it's like being a chef. You really have to get good quality ingredients and you try and put them together and, magic can happen. In terms of collaboration, I think it's certainly true that our industry's changed a lot. When I look back actually to the first nonprofit I did, we actually are very happy to say that this March I'll be chairing the 20th anniversary of that particular organization. And that started literally in an elevator at an academic meeting where I was in the elevator and I realized that everyone in the elevator was friends of mine, colleagues. I was actually running all their programs. In fact, they were all running phase threes in the same indication, and yet not one of them was really talking to each other during the meeting. And my joke then was, if two industry folks were meeting during an academic meeting at that point, one was interviewing for a job. There was no other reason they would talk to each other. And it just made no sense to me, because they were working on the same problem. And it was clear there were pre-competitive issues that they should be talking about. And I think just our industry had been very, very siloed and very secretive. Those days, no one could see your protocols. Everything was considered secret, things that shouldn't be. And I literally stopped the elevator at the bottom. I said, listen, you're all working on the same program. I'm actually running all these programs. You need to have dinner tonight. I don't care what you're doing. We're going to cancel that and have dinner together. And it was the first time really that those folks had got together. So I think it's just doing what's right and what patients would think is right. I mean, I remember thinking to myself, if patients knew that these people were not really working with each other on areas they could, like they can compete on the molecule, but really try and do a better job. That people would not be happy about that if that was, if they heard that, if they would assume people would collaborate. And I've certainly over the years been in meetings with certain leaders, whether academic or otherwise, were actually extremely not very competitive, right? It was just a mindset. But I think a lot has changed. I mean, there's no question. Today we hear about collaboration much more. I think certainly everyone's witnessed how the pandemic and developing the COVID vaccines has really resulted in a lot more collaboration between companies, and I think that's much more sort of accepted now than it was. And I think it's because the problems that we have, let's take Alzheimer's as an example, are just too big for anyone.
I was thinking of that just now because you and I have had some side conversations, of course, of the disappointments of so many of the molecules, the whole amyloid plaque theory. And I know you and a colleague wrote a paper on this not too long ago. I would very much appreciate your getting your take on do are we lacking sufficient insight into the mechanism of action around Alzheimer's disease? Do we have enough? Why is it that we're, and this is your field, you're a neurologist, you're a psychiatrist. What's holding us back? Is it collaboration? Are we sharing enough data with each other? Is that the problem? Are we just clueless in terms of Alzheimer's disease? I mean, what's your take as both someone in the field and as a counselor sought by many companies around the world?
Sure. So we could spend a whole podcast talking about this one topic, but we won't. So I'll be brief about it. It's interesting. A lot of times people, let's just zoom out of Alzheimer's for a minute. A lot of people, when they think about lack of change, they keep questioning, is this a lack of technology? Is this a lack of, whatever? And in many cases, the answer is actually culture. So if you look at Alzheimer's is different, I'll get to that. But I think in many cases, when people ask why hasn't have any field gone further forward, or why hasn't technology been adopted, the answer usually isn't that the technology doesn't exist. It usually actually does. It's more about the culture and being able to change. So that's one aspect. I think particularly in Alzheimer's, we actually have both the technology and the culture. So in terms of technology in this broader sense, there's no question that unlike, say, oncology, where the US government in particular had spent, huge amounts of money on oncology basic science, neuroscience only started to gain anything, the remote, small part of that decades later. So we're just a little bit behind in neuroscience in the funding of basic sciences. And it also doesn't help that brain is probably the most complex, organ. Therefore, there's a lot more to know about. So we certainly still know very little about the brain compared with what we could know. So one is the technology, just understanding the brain, and that. The other one, the cultural part, I think, is one that there hasn't been enough spending compared to, say, oncology, and there's also political reasons for that, probably, and other cultural reasons, and maybe even stigma. But also, there's clear that there's many articles covering this where people debate whether there's the amyloid mafia, whether the funding has been too focused on amyloid, and people take different views of that. But it's certainly true that I think we are not where we're supposed to be, and I go to many academic meetings where people are very busy patting each other on the back, saying how wonderful they've done. But really, if you look at it, compared to many fields, we're still not achieving much yet, right? And it's not for lack of trying, for sure. Plenty of good people trying to do the right thing. But I think those two things probably both exist, haven't got us there yet.
I wanted to explore from the genesis of Summit. I understand you felt that there was a need for a gathering that enabled people to come together and explore like ideas. It's evolved since then to something much bigger. It's a community. It's a bit of a movement at times, and people come to Summit to discuss their ideas. Tell me, when you look at when you created Summit and today, are there dramatic shifts in terms of the vision you have, what you're realizing today, where this is going?
Sure. There's a couple of things I can talk about. One of them is actually sort of broaden some. Maybe we can do the same true for DTRA. I think, look, I've got plenty of other things to do. These are not my day jobs, right? So if I could have not done them, my life would be much easier. So the only reason I'm compelled to do them is because I just see this gap that really needs help, right? So an area where we need to really come together. And I think with Summit, it actually really was around trying to think about how technology was going to impact life sciences. And it's sometimes hard to really remember that 12 years ago, most of the big tech companies, whether it was the iPhone or Google, all those things didn't exist or, were nascent, right? And most people in life sciences really were not seeing the impact that technology was going to have. Technology to them meant EDC. It really was kind of a time where a lot of people still didn't understand the dramatic impact technology would have. They just didn't. And I remember actually having to work quite hard to persuade people that we should talk about new technology. Whereas they want to, in general, talk about just the normal methodological stuff we talk about in drug development.
New molecules.
Right. And just, how to do trials better. But technology just hadn't captured the imagination. So because of that, I felt that we really needed to do that. And with DTRA, it's kind of similar, where decentralized trials are not new. However, they hadn't had the traction. We had started talking about forming a consortium prior to the pandemic. So it wasn't a reaction to the pandemic. We truly felt that the need was there to increase access to clinical trials. It happened the pandemic has really accelerated that. But again, we needed a neutral forum where people could come together who on the surface of it are competitors, but clearly have common needs in trying to set standards, to have the same glossary that they're talking about and really work together on areas that need in collaboration. So I think both of those entities and others I've been involved in, it's really the only reason I've done them is no one else would. And, and I also felt that, quite frankly, is my frustration with a lot of meetings that either are, driven by a financial kind of need, that their companies, just that's their business and they just run meetings. They don't necessarily have the domain expertise to run them. And that's, I think, got more and more prevalent more recently. There's lots of entities, running healthcare meetings that really are there, as a business.
Yeah, I think that's important. I think that's a very important. It's really why I always refer to Summit, CNS Summit, as a community. Yes, you could say functionality, it's a meeting, but it's really a gathering of like minds. I want to go back to something you said. You, by the way, used the word collaboration 3 times, and I just want to highlight that because it's so you. It's so you of what you're trying to create. But I was thinking, I didn't really watch the Super Bowl. I apologize to all of our listeners, but I did catch the Larry David commercial about sort of like debunking innovation again and again and again. No, and I think of what you just said on digital therapeutics. And I remember, I don't know, maybe it was 4 or 5 years ago, you had a session and Therapeutics was there. And they were talking about, I think at that time, a collaboration, maybe it was with Novartis they were working on or something of that nature. You see, I pay close attention to everything you do. And, a lot of people are grappling with, we're a biopharmaceutical industry. We got this technology. I don't know what we're going to do with digital health technologies. It seems to be like, not related to us. You recognized it maybe 4 or 5 years ago. You saw digital therapeutics and therapeutics playing this very distinct role collaboratively together. Do you mind sharing with us a little bit about your thinking about why you wanted to bring a platform together where a mega company like a Novartis or a Bristol Myers Squibb and a Pear Therapeutics or other platforms could come together under one roof, and where you see that going? Because I really think that digital and therapeutics do find a happy nexus, but you seem to have a clearer vision than most.
Well, first of all, I mean, to be clear, digital therapeutics, the jury is still out. Okay. So although, we're known at Summit for being probably the meeting where most of the time people see something for the first time, right? Or a company comes out of stealth, I would say I'm a kind of technological realist. So I'm not sort of a cheerleader for any technology or that, so I think you have to kind of balance between being very hopeful the technology will solve some of our problems, and it can, but also understanding kind of the environment since. So digital therapeutics is a good example where I would say digital therapeutics 1.0, which is the leaders right now, it's been a hard slog. I mean, it still is. There was an article just today, and I think around the challenges of reimbursement, right, across the board, challenge of uptake and all that. So I think the jury is out. However, I think the digital therapeutics, I'll define it very broadly. Okay. So, at one end, you have just, companion digital with drugs. At the other end, you have pure digital therapeutics as the intervention. What I would say, and many other, obviously parts of the spectrum, but what I would say is what I see as the potential. It's clear that whether you're talking about healthcare delivery or whether you're talking about, the life sciences, to get to the scale and to reduce the cost the way we need to for the world population, digital is a solution to that, right? So there's no way we can actually have equitable access and, being able to cover the whole world if you're doing it the traditional ways we were doing. So that to me is kind of the biggest thing to think about, is how do we scale things? And clearly digital comes into that. And I think in the future, there's no question in my mind that pretty much any intervention will eventually have a digital component. And that may look many different ways, and there'll be some pure digital interventions. And whether at what point that becomes mainstream or the reimbursement really happens is an open question. And look, many companies that were leaders in pharma and engaging have been burnt quite a bit, with those. And that's not surprising. If it's the first time you're prescribing a digital within the workflow of physicians, if you don't get that right, you're not going to get physicians prescribing it. So I think we're still struggling with that in terms of getting that right. However, so I would say short term, it's been challenging for those companies. I think long term, I'm pretty bullish on the potential, is how I would say it, especially in areas I would call behavioral, not neuroscience only, but any chronic disease where we need to intervene over the long term. There's no question that digital plays an important part.
This is important. I think you've just in those thoughts. I think any executive should be listening to your words very, very closely. I wish we had an hour to explore, what would be the steps for people to make smart investments in digital therapeutics, or good due diligence. That's probably a future program, or a panel at CNS Summit, most certainly. So, with the time we have, I want to also explore a little bit about your work in decentralized clinical trials. You're the co-founder of DTRA.org. It's a mammoth organization. I had the privilege of attending the first gathering in Boston. Many companies there, leaders, obviously recognizing that we can't go back. The status quo is not going to work for us any longer. So I just wanted to ask you a little bit in terms of what do you see coming out of that form of collaboration with industry in terms of decentralized clinical trials. If you were to say, hey, Gil, listeners, a year from now, I think you're going to see industry do X, Y, and Z, how would you fill in the blank?
Sure. Well, first thing I'll say is, for the details, certainly on the DTRA.org website, all our initiatives are there. We have 4 priority areas and 12 initiatives, and these were all generated by crowdsourcing our, members. So those are areas that people felt was the greatest need right now in our initial initiatives to do that. So that's all detailed on the website. I'm not going to particularly go over those on this call, but what I would say is in terms of looking towards the future, the commonest question is what you brought up already, there's no going back. Well, people worry about that because if you look at the analog of that in healthcare, which is telemedicine, obviously there was huge uptake during COVID, but those numbers are very plummeted, and people are like, is that going to be, where is the new normal in terms of the utilization of that? What I see, and the same question gets asked as well in clinical trials, is it really going to change or is it not? What I would say is obviously being in DTRA and being on constant contact to all the companies involved, we definitely have seen a shift within pharma around in a very systematic way, really re-looking at everything they do. And this doesn't mean that we're going to go to a virtual model, or this is one of the misconceptions, right? So we really see the future as definitely being hybrid, clearly, but also hybrid means that it could be 5% decentralized, 90%, depending on the indication, depending on lots of factors. So what decentralized really is a set of methodologies that hopefully will make it more patient-centric, a term I don't particularly like, but definitely will be more in tune with what patients are telling us they want. And what patients want could be going to the site. It doesn't mean they necessarily want to be, virtual. So in the future, I think giving that optionality to patients, being able to withdraw from a much broader range of patients, because you can do that, that's what decentralized will bring, really the optionality to be hybrid and have certain aspects that you can make digital, be digital, and other aspects you can't will still be brick and mortar. So that's what we'll see is kind of there's no question that we're seeing systematic change within the company sponsoring trials where they're really looking at everything, their SOPs, their protocol templates, all those things, and really saying what of this can be digitized, what can be done differently. And that doesn't necessarily mean they're even saving money doing that, quite honestly. It's more about being competitive by being a trial that actually fits into the life of patients and they're wanting to come into. The majority of patients never go into a trial because we just don't make it convenient enough, and make them know about it. So all those things, I think decentralized is one major way of trying to solve those problems.
No, thank you for that. One last question. And I don't think I've ever asked a guest on the program this question before, but in your case, you're a neurologist, you're a psychiatrist, You've created meetings. I think that a vast number of the drugs in neurology that are approved in the United States, somehow or another, you probably have had a voice or an influence in terms of the trial design and the regulatory review of those medications. You're also a advisor to corporations around the world in terms of their programs, in terms of mental health or neurology, psychiatry. You've traveled the world. So I've got to ask you, Amir, because I follow you closely as a friend, what's next? What are you not doing right now that you say, Gil, watch, I'm going to be doing this in the next year? Tell us, because we're all Amir Kalali watchers. What should we be looking for?
I think my Twitter profile says something like, I may be up to something.
Yes, you always are. It does say you are. So what should we be looking for? So we're not surprised.
Yeah, there's definitely new things in the offing. I'm not sure I can go into them yet, but there's definitely new things I'm up to. But what I'm up to most sort of next couple of months is actually looking to see whether we can go on the road again and go places. The only challenge is that most places I want to go to currently are not open. So I have a trip to Japan planned the end of March and things like that, which I can't do. So what you can watch for is me being on the road again, for sure.
Well, we're looking forward to that.
And seeing people, for sure. But there's definitely, I think I would say broadly, more of the same, which is what are new ways that we can help people collaborate together in a way that's fun, but also really has an impact. I think, I always feel that people come to life sciences, they don't get to it by accident. There's a reason they're in life sciences. They're trying to do good. Sometimes they're stuck in entities that they don't feel good about or feel happy about, right? So how do we leverage the people's basic instinct to do the right thing and do what's right for patients, which are, themselves, their families? What can we do more to do that and move away from the commercialization of everything and sort of, how do we have a genuine connection? How do we work on things that matter? And I think people want that. I think the pandemic has also amplified that. People want to be doing work that truly matters. I mean, that could be a tagline for many companies and they use that, but it may not be true in some cases, right? But how do people really feel fulfilled in what they're doing and feel good about what they're doing, which they deserve because they are working very hard?
Well, Amir, Dr. Kalali, what a thrill. I would say for everybody who's listening, follow Dr. Amir Kalali on Twitter, on LinkedIn, CNS Summit, dtra.org. It's well worth your efforts to see what he's up to, because as he said, he might be up to something. I assure you, he always is. Truly, our industry is a renaissance person. Amir, thank you for joining us today. Back to you, Greg.
And that's a wrap for today's broadcast. We want to thank Dr. Kalali for his insights and our listeners for taking the time to tune in. You can learn more about Health Unabashed on the program page at healthcarenowradio.com. And do keep the conversation going with Gil and me on Twitter by connecting with us via @Gil_Bash, that's BASHE, and Greg Masters, MPH, and that's Greg with 2 G's, and do tag your tweets with the hashtag Health Unabashed. We air weekly on healthcarenowradio.com at 8:30 a.m., 6:30 p.m., 2:30 a.m. Eastern, or for you left coasters, 7:30 a.m., 3:30 p.m., and 11:30 p.m. Pacific. Until next time, stay unapologetically passionate about improving health.